Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. This week on the show, I'm joined by Bryan Lemke of the Deer Society to discuss his double-booner 2023 season, the lessons he learned along the way, and his favorite late season tactics. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light and their Camo for Conservation initiative, which I love seeing them giving back to the National Deer Association and making good things happen for deer and deer hunters. And today on the podcast, we are talking to a deer hunter who's had some pretty good things happen to himself this year. We're talking to Bryan Lemke. He is the co-owner of Almond Eye Productions. He is the host of the Deer Society podcast and a frequently seen hunter on the Deer Society YouTube channel, diehard deer hunter from the upper Midwest, and he has just about wrapped up an absolutely banner hunting season this year. He has killed his biggest buck ever, not once, but twice this season, and broke that magical 170-inch mark both times. It's not every year that happens, not every lifetime that happens for a lot of people. So I wanted to have Bryan on the show to talk through this season, talk through those hunts, talk through the kind of unique circumstances in each one. One was one of those hunts that goes on for years, and one of these hunts was in some ways a surprise. And that's how hunting goes sometimes. So I wanted to talk to him about how these came together, what he learned along the way, the tactics, the strategies, the approaches he took that led to this extra special season. And then I wanted to wrap it up with a discussion around the late season. For those of us still trying to fill a tag at this time of the year in December or January, what are some of those things that can work, that can help you close the deal and wrap up your year on a high note? So that is the game plan today. I think it's a fun conversation. We cover some good stuff. I think you're going to enjoy it. And I think it's a perfect way for us to head into the holidays kind of on a lighter note, right? We're going to hear some fun stories. We're going to learn some things, but mostly we're going to celebrate hunting season. We're going to celebrate this great fall that is now kind of edging towards the end, which is always bittersweet. But as we approach Christmas and the new year, I think heading into it with a smile on our faces is the way to go. So with that all said, and without any further ado, let's get to my chat with Bryan Lemke. All right, with me now on the show, first-time guest, we got Bryan Lemke. Bryan, welcome to the show.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
I'm glad we're doing this. Glad to connect. We haven't really got to talk at all in the past, but I've been checking out your work for a number of years now, watching some Deer Society videos, listening to some of the podcasts, and I've enjoyed it. And so you've been on the list of like, hey, I got to get a hold of Bryan someday. So glad it happened and appreciate you making time to do it.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man, and have obviously seen and listened to a lot of your guys' podcasts, and you do a great job. Definitely a fan, and yeah, fortunate to jump on here with you and have a conversation, and feelings mutual.
Yeah, well, there's good things to talk about today because it seems like you've been having like a season for the ages. Is this rank right up there at the top for you?
Yeah, it does. It's crazy to think, growing up as a little kid, started hunting. I grew up in Pennsylvania. My dad got me into hunting and been hunting since a little kid, watching all the old school guys, the Michael Waddells and the Buckmasters. And, it was always a dream of mine to, hunt big deer and not just hunt big deer, but be in the industry and all these things. And then, you look at, Pennsylvania, we didn't have giant deer. I mean, I can remember my first deer. I was still super proud of it. This little 9-pointer. And, you grow and your goals change as a hunter and different things, and always had dreams of shooting a deer of a certain caliber, whether it's a Booner or, a big one, and have had, a lot of opportunities over the years to shoot some pretty good deer. And I can remember, growing up as a kid, it's like, man, by 30 years old, I want to shoot a deer that's 170 or bigger, know, and then the years go on, and I'm 34 years old, and it's something that you dream of your entire life. And fortunately, in Minnesota, finally was able to shoot my first deer that was over 170, a Booner, and then few weeks later, go to Iowa and shoot another one. So to say it was a dream season is kind of an understatement for me. I mean, I'm fulfilled. Definitely, I've made a lot of memories over the years, but as far as deer hunting wise, it's definitely been one to remember.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of us that grew up in a place like Pennsylvania or Michigan, like me, or other states like that, down in the southeast, northeast, those regions where we watch TV, we watch the hunts in the Midwest, and we see these big giant bucks, and we're thinking, man, I want to someday kill a big deer, but maybe that's not around. It is more and more these days in many states, but maybe we're not seeing 170s in Pennsylvania all the time. Definitely not in Michigan all the time.
No doubt.
What do you think it was for you when you first made that switch to at least trying to target like older deer? And I'm not sure when that was for you or if that was right away, but I know for me, like for most of my childhood and teenage years, it was like I want to kill any buck. That was a challenge that I hadn't figured out. And then it wasn't until I was like 21, I think, when I decided, okay, 3.5-year-old, I want to try to kill a deer like that. And that required a huge shift in everything I did. When did that, if you had a shift like that, when did that happen for you? And what were the things that you had to change or saw the most success with once you changed?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, started bow hunting when I was 12 and was fortunate enough to shoot a deer when I was 12 with a bow and 13. And again, just we're talking little deer and was so happy, and 14. And then I think it was the fall of when I was 14 or 15. My dad had always wanted to go on an outfitted hunt his entire life, and finally saved up enough money and thought I was at the age and kind of experience level that he could take me with. So he booked a hunt at Bluff Country Outfitters in Buffalo County, Wisconsin. I know you've been there. You know Tom and Lori and Shane and absolutely unbelievable people.
Great people.
So went up there and ended up shooting probably a 3.5-year-old 135-inch deer. And was like on top of the moon. I thought I was a rock star. I'm like, I am freaking Michael Waddell. This is it. Like, I am the man.
Heck yeah.
So in doing that, just built a really good relationship with Tom and Lori. Fell in love with their place and the people and in the Midwest, and actually started coming up here in the summers to Wisconsin and working for Tom and just learning as much as I could. So it was one of those things where he would ended up going to college in Madison, Wisconsin. And I'd come up all summer and work, and then he'd let me hunt some. But it was just spending time around Tom and Shane and Lori and those kind of people. I started learning as much as I could. So I think, kind of at that point is when that gear kind of switched for me. My goals changed a little bit. And I think the number one thing is, I became obsessed with deer hunting, and just, for me, it was more than just like even killing the deer. It was filming them. I mean, Shane and I were going out every night and filming deer in the summer and just seeing those bigger deer. Yeah. I think what's got to change is just that level of patience, that want to, if you want to shoot a bigger deer or have a different goal, you have to be willing to put the time in, but you have to be willing to, pass those smaller deer to have an opportunity at a bigger deer like that. Because typically, you're going to have opportunities that before, you would take in a heartbeat. Yeah. So it's just kind of switching that mindset. And I was fortunate enough to be around it. And for me, it was like, okay, I'm going to learn as much as I can about whitetails and big deer and just engulf myself with it. And it's transitioned into where I am now. And, for me, it was never really about, maybe as a kid, it's like, I want to shoot this big deer and scoring deer and whatever. But, you mentioned it earlier. I think it's that transition into, shooting deer of older age and understanding what that quality deer management means. And, I think that there's, now that I've been around enough deer and filmed enough deer, I that's what I do for a living is film. Filmed enough other people shoot deer of a certain caliber. And man, I think you could walk up to a 170-inch deer and you could walk up to a 150-inch 8-pointer that's just massive and gnarly, and like they're even a different caliber of deer, even though one scores more than the other. Like you walk up to a deer that's old and just like you pick them up, and that's a different feeling, like a different level of even appreciation. I think you should appreciate all deer you shoot, but when you get to deer of those upper age structures, those just gnarly warriors, that's a different game.
That's pretty darn special. Yeah, that's for sure. I've yet to lose the sense of awe of a really old deer. Even like you said, like even a smaller scoring deer still gets me way more fired up than a young high scoring deer. There's just like the body. You just see that big bull walking through the woods and the way that all the other deer react to them and the way they can carry themselves in the woods and the things they do and the savviness they bring to the table. Just, man, I've yet to get sick of it.
Well, that's why whitetail hunting is so awesome. They're all so unique.
Yeah.
You know, everyone is so unique. And like I look at it, you know, I like to do a lot of shed hunting too. And it's like when I pick up a shed, and it hits me with a shed more than like when I pick up a live, you know, not a live deer, but a harvested deer for some reason. But you pick up that shed and you hold it in your hand and you're like, man, think about what this piece of bone went through. Like, you know, whether that deer is 2 years old or a year old or 5 years old, 6 years old, like a deer grew this thing on his head, right? Carried it around the entire year and then shed it. And here you are now with it in your hand. It's like, how crazy is that when you break it down and think of it? If, you know, it's cliche to say, you know, if only the thing could talk.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you could learn so much from that, I just think that's the coolest thing in the world.
I just sit there and spin them around my hand, just like stare at it, looking at all sides and thinking about those very same things. I'm right there with you. I could just spend like an hour just daydreaming.
No doubt.
So
I try to
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I try to tell my kids about that. My 5-year-old, you know, he's at the age, he's got a dog, or we have a dog, and, you know, go out there and shed hunt. We were on my Minnesota farm this past winter, and we were shed hunting, and we walk up and there's this little spike shed horn laying there, and he runs over and he picks it up, and I'm like, dude, how cool is that? You know, and he's looking at it and he's looking at me, and he's like, this isn't a shed, Dad. And he throws it back down to the ground. You know, it's funny, but like, you know, you try to instill that in your kids and in the next generation, you know, just that appreciation, how cool that is, you know, to just have the opportunity to enjoy that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty darn great. So, Sticker 10, right? That's the name of that first buck you killed this year, right? So that was your first booner. It's funny you mentioned the booner before 30. A hunting buddy and I had a bet to see if we could each get a booner before 30. And he did. He got his on his 30th birthday. And then on my 30th year, I shot a buck that I thought was. And I was like, I did it. Shot the buck and walked up to the absolute giant. And then we scored it, and he ended up scoring 165. And for a half second afterwards, I was disappointed. And then that's when I realized, like, it's so silly to get worked up about a number, right? Because it's such an incredible deer, no matter what it scores. So that was a moment for me when I realized I had to, you know, get back to what we were just talking about, just the impressiveness of the animal itself, regardless of whatever numbers attached to it, regardless of what anybody else thinks. But all that said, it still is pretty darn cool to kill a deer like that, no matter what. So the Sticker 10,
no doubt.
Give me the story. How'd it go down?
You know, it was crazy. So there's a piece that I lease here in Minnesota with a few other buddies, and we've had it now for, I think, 5 years, and I've had a lot of success on it. It's a really good piece. You know, we kind of all work together, put in the work, and it's been good. But low pressure approach, like we all, you know, go in there with the right winds. We don't overhunt it. And you know, I guess it was 2 years ago now. I still had a tag late season and was hunting with the muzzleloader. We had snow on the ground, and I was hunting over standing beans and saw just a ton of bucks. I think I ended up seeing like 19 bucks that day. It was awesome. Nothing that I wanted to pull the trigger on, but some really good deer that were 3.5 years old, that, you know, we wanted to make it till the next year. So anyways, fast forward to the next year, and this deer shows up on trail camera early. And he looks like a giant. He's huge framed. That's where he got his name, Sticker 10, just a big frame 10-pointer. And he had, that year he had matching stickers on it, just on one side. He had 2 stickers coming off his G2, but clean 10, big frame. And so got to talking with Lance and some other guys, and he's like, man, that's that deer from the year before. So we started looking at pictures and we matched him up, and I had actually filmed him. Andrew was filming me that day. Had actually filmed him that day late season. So he was a 3.5-year-old 10-pointer, nothing super special to him. Beautiful deer, but just young, clean, not a deer that I would even, think about really even matching up looking like this. But we broke him down and like, man, that's him for sure. Just same frame, but he put on a ton. And I think that there's deer out there that just have it. And there's deer that don't. And, you can have a deer that gets old and gets gnarly and massive and all this stuff, but never reaches that big frame, high scoring potential.
Sure.
And I think this deer, it was apparent that he had it. So we all sat down. We're like, okay, what do we do? Like, is this a deer that we target?
And he's 4, right?
We let him? He's 4 now. Yep. Or do we try to let him go? We have pretty good neighbors, but they, their standards aren't necessarily as high all the time. And we're like, well, let's try. Hey, we can't see what happens if we don't try it. So we're gonna all agree to pass this deer. So lo and behold, this deer becomes one of the most killable deer on the property all year.
Of course.
I mean, like I had to stop looking at my reveals because like there's places I wouldn't even go and hunt because I'm like, I don't even want to see him. I don't want to put myself in that scenario. So few encounters with them, not personally, but some of the other guys had encounters with them, passed him all year round. Fast forward to late season that year, I was tagged out on another deer. My business partner, Adam, was trying to shoot his first buck. So that's another kind of long story, but Adam has produced hunting content for a long, long time, over 10 years, but he's never hunted, didn't grow up in a hunting family, never hunted himself. And he's got 2 young boys, 5 and 3. And he said, you know what? He said, I've seen all the good that hunting does for you and for the people around and the values it teaches. And I want to get into hunting so I can pass that down to my boys.
That's so cool.
Will you take me? Will you take me? And I'm like, heck yes, I'll take you. So, we start hunting and he's got limited time. We hunt a couple times and we have a couple encounters, and late season, it's just like the time that, okay, we get out there. So, and we can talk about some of the strategy later on because I think it's kind of cool. But we crawled into this blind, and I got a picture on a cell camera like 700 yards away of sticker 10, right? And he's coming that direction. Well, we were sitting over standing beans, and I'm like, dude, we're gonna see this deer. And he's like, well, what are we gonna do? And I'm like, man, I said, I would love for you to shoot that deer. I said, I hope we don't see him, to be honest with you. I said, because, we all had an agreement. Sure enough, it was like 10 minutes later, out comes sticker 10 right into the field. And he was hunting with a crossbow, and stood there and fed for 50 yards or at 50 yards for 10, 15 minutes. And we just watched him, got some epic footage of him.
Wow.
And it was just a cool encounter, like to just see him on the hoof like that and know that he was probably going to make it. So kind of a twist there, but anyways, he makes it through the year, sheds on our property. 2 of the guys I leased with each picked up one of his sheds. So it was like, man, success. It worked. We got him through. So, the next year it was like, hopefully he was going to keep his home.
I got to ask you, I got to throw a timeout in here and ask you a question leading into is the coming year the year you kill him at 5?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the coming year would be this year.
Okay. So one of the things that I've been curious about as I've listened to you tell some other stories on the Deer Society podcast and stuff, and you just shared a couple examples of this. You guys hunt with multiple guys on the same property. And I've always thought, I've done this on a small scale with like one other buddy, but I've never had like a pile of buddies all on the same property, especially when you've got like a target deer. I've wondered, how do you do that in a way that doesn't become just tough? Like, I know when I'm on a target deer, I'm trying to figure them out. And then once I have an encounter, then I'm like right back in there after them, or I'm super strategic with where I'm going and what I'm doing. But when I've hunted a property with a buddy, it's kind of like, well, let's flip a coin to see who picks where today or who's going to hunt where. And you're trying to be fair about it. And you're trying not to, be a jerk about anything. But it would seem really hard to be able to like make a strong play on a deer when you constantly have to shuffle around with other guys or worry you're stepping on toes, or I'm sure you're trying to do this in a way that's not ruining your friendship. So how do you do it?
Man, I think it's hard, and I think there is no great answer to it. I think that you have to, find a group of people that are like-minded and understanding, and understand that, look, sometimes you might get them, sometimes somebody else might get them. And it's hard. Like, I'll be honest with you. We talked about at the beginning of the year, because we knew that was going to be the target. And there's other good deer on this property, but like that was the one. And, we talked about, okay, do we split up the property into 3 sections? Well, that's hard too. And, so-and-so put in work over here, and they might not get the benefit for it. So like that was an option that was thrown around. When it came down to it, it was like, look, somehow, and it's way easier said than done, right? But like, we have to all be on the same page and say, look, we got to work it out somehow. Maybe you go and hunt and you get first pick tonight. And if we're going to hunt next Tuesday, well, then you get first pick on where you're going to hunt. And I won't say that I have a great answer for it, because I don't think that there is one, but I think you have to put yourself in the mindset of, look, it's a team effort, as hard as that is. And you know what? I'm going to be happy if Lance or Kyle gets them. And, if I get them, great. I think they'll be happy for me too. Again, that sounds like a perfect environment or scenario, and it's hard to feel that way, but that's just it. So I think we all have a pretty good understanding of what stands we can hunt, what stands we can't, waiting for the right time. A lot of us are busy, so like a couple of those other guys are filming or guiding during the fall too, so it's not like any one of us has the opportunity to just go in there and pound it every day. Like, I might have this week and Lance might have next week, or so it all works out in the end, I guess, is the simple answer.
So if you have, it sounds like you kind of rotate who gets first pick to some degree, right? But what happens if you have an encounter, like if you're going to hunt multiple days in a row, and so today you have a close encounter with the sticker 10, and now tomorrow you had first pick that night. So you had first pick, you picked a spot, you almost killed him, but didn't quite come together. You of course want to be right back there tomorrow or wherever you think he's going to be. Do you get like a mulligan and get to go in again because you had the close call and you kind of have like that, or do you guys have to rotate?
Yeah. So I'll tell you, it kind of happened this year almost a little bit. So I think it's if you have an encounter with a deer and you want to go back in there, it's like I'm not going to say no, don't go back in there. Like I think you should. And I'll tell in the story. Lance was super close to killing this deer a few days before I killed him, and I would have been super happy if he did. Just worked out that I was there and shot him on that day. But yeah, I mean, if you have an encounter with a deer, I think it's only right that you go in there, back after him, and we try not to step on each other's toes. And it's what it is. I've accepted the fact that's the hard thing about group hunting. You accept the fact that, hey, that's part of it. I couldn't lease this piece just on my own, and neither could they. So that's part of the give and take of the whole deal.
Yeah, and I gotta believe that you more than make up the possible downsides of the hunting being a little bit more challenging. I'm betting you make up for it with the fun and the camaraderie you have and getting to like do all this stuff with your buddies, right?
Absolutely. Definitely. Sharing that intel back and forth, like, early season, those first couple weeks of the season, it's like, man, and it happened with sticker 10. It was like, okay, where's sticker 10? I'm running 5-10 cameras, Lance, Kyle, they're all running cameras. So it's like, in the morning and sending pictures. It's like, okay, where was he last night?
Yeah.
And that deer, the cool thing about him, I actually kind of changed his name right at the very end of Waldo, because that deer traveled more this year than really any other deer that we've had on that farm. I mean, he was north to south to east to west, all over the place.
So I guess let's hear it. How did that year 5 come together?
Yeah, so he started showing up in velvet, looking huge. I mean, he was a giant. He had made that next leap and turned from sticker 10 into really sticker 12. He was mainframe 6x6, had matching stickers. He actually had a little pigtail drop tine, split brow tines. Like, jeez. I mean, he was the man. And it was one of those things where we were just getting intel, and he was there all the time. But he was all over the place. This particular section is like 400 acres. And it kind of splits up. Like, we have the north section, the middle section, and the south section. And a lot of times the deer on the north side stay on the north side, south side deer stay on the south side. Well, this deer, he would be on the north side in the evening, south side in the middle of the night, west side in the morning. It was crazy. There was no rhyme or reason to what he was doing. So I just started trying to understand, what he did the previous year. So like, where was his core area? Once October came, where was it? And breaking that all down, we're sharing intel. Kyle actually went, and it was one of those deals where this is kind of a good example. So, early season opening weekend, that deer was there. I don't think that he was going to be super killable yet. He had daylighted maybe a couple times. But Kyle, he had time to hunt. He's like, guys, I'm going to hunt opening week. Is anybody else going to hunt? And I think Lance was gone. I said, man, go hunt. I can hunt. I'm going to stay out of there. Like, go get him. And he hunted, didn't end up seeing him. But like, he had quite a stretch there where he hunted and the deer was around, just pretty nocturnal yet. So finally, as we get into, and I had maybe hunted once before kind of that mid-October time. And I'm a big believer in scout more than you hunt. So like, I try to get my cameras, let them do a lot of the intel and scouting for me. But I try to stay out of there until those windows are kind of right. And I don't mean to say this arrogantly, but I when I go and hunt, like I legitimately think that I have a chance of killing the deer. Right. So yep. I don't, trust me, don't always get them. But like when I'm going to go, like I want to put all the odds in my favor. So anyways, this deer, we start seeing that he moves kind of to the northwest side of our property. And it's kind of what he did last year around that mid-October time, kind of started to shrink his core area down. And then it was like, boom, we're getting pictures of him in the same spot every night, every morning. It wasn't during the daylight, but ended up going in. At this point, crops are starting to come off. And I hung a new stand kind of in the middle of this, we call it the deep middle field. It's kind of a big field right in the middle of the property. It was corn. It had just got cut. And hung a set there. And I'm like, this is where I think, we can kill this deer with a north wind. We had a bunch of stands on the other side of the timber that we could hunt with the south wind. And anyways, lo and behold, I never had a picture of that deer coming out that way. But I just knew that I figured he was going to do that because he did that a lot last year.
And so sorry, I was going to ask why. Is it just based off of that historical pattern, or was there something about how that terrain set up or something else?
So basically it's a big drainage ditch, and we never go in there. It's all sanctuary. And it's probably, I say it's a ditch. I mean, it's a significant section of timber, probably 350, 400 yards wide, okay. But just a big ditch with ag on either side. And he usually goes out to that north side. But I know when he comes out to that south side, like he's got to be coming by there somewhere. There was a big scrape there. A lot of does were coming out there. And I know that the previous year I got a lot of pictures of him coming out that way. Okay. He was coming out more on the other side, but we can't hunt that side with a north wind. So it was tough. I just knew we needed to have something on that other side for that north wind. Well, Lance was coming in to hunt, and across that field, probably 200 yards away, we have a ground blind there. And Lance was coming down to hunt. I think it was Thursday. He's like, I'm going to go to that ground blind. And I said, just hung this other stand. I said, maybe you should go sit that other stand. It's close to the timber. And he's like, well, I'm going to go and kind of observe and see what happens. I said, okay. I said, I may go in and hunt that other stand. It was going to be Friday morning and see what happens. So that was kind of the plan. I didn't hunt that Thursday. He goes in there Thursday night. Guess who shows up? Walks right under that stand, sticker tag. So he sees the deer and he comes out and he actually called to him, and that deer just stands up, bully walks 4 steps towards him. And I'm watching the video. I'm like, oh my God, that deer's going to come, after he's showing me. And a doe ran out behind him, and he ended up circling and chasing that doe off. Well, so he's like, well, next morning I want to go back in there. I'm like, yeah, go back in there. And he's like, I know you were going to sit that stand that you hung, and it's just across the field. He's like, you can still go sit there. And I'm like, dude, we got plenty of ground here. You go hunt that deer, this morning and tomorrow, whatever, like you saw him, go hunt him. Well, he goes and sits there. Sure enough, that deer comes out, walks right under that stand again, and comes out, and he sees him and ends up following a doe off. So it's like, at this point, I'm like, man, I wish that, you have encounters with this deer. Like, I wish that he would shoot him. And And on the other hand, I'm thinking like, man, I knew that deer was going to do this. It was just a gut instinct. Like he should have sat in that stand or I should have been there, whatever. Well, he had to leave that evening, go back and take care of some family stuff. And so I went and jumped in that stand in the evening and had a guy that just started working for us. His name's Patrick, and he was filming me. And sitting there, and we see this buck chasing a doe below us. And he's like, man, that looks like a good deer. And I said, oh, that's Wide 9. It was a deer we called Wide 9. And
good name.
He's just a big,
good solid name.
Yeah. But he was just this 5.5-year-old heavy. He's one of those deer that's like super impressive. I mean, he has bases for days, kind of short tines, but like just a gnarly old, like big face. So he asked me, he's like, if that deer comes out, you're going to shoot him. And I'm like, man, I don't know. I said, game time decision. I said, maybe. Well, he ends up coming out in the cornfield, probably 100 yards away from us. And right about that time, a doe comes up the trail right under us. And I'm like, we're about to find out. It's about to get real. So
decision time.
Anyways, that deer turns and here he comes, beeline right to us. And that stand that I hung was in a big oak tree. We weren't very high off the ground, probably 12 feet off the ground, just the way the limbs were. And he stops at 15 yards and starts making a scrape on the oak tree that we're sitting in. And I have my bow there and I have my release on and I'm just looking at him like, God. And for whatever reason, in that moment, any other day, I probably would have shot this deer and I didn't. It was just like, I didn't feel it. And he turned and he walked down the trail and Patrick looked at me, I'll never forget. And he says, what are you doing? And I'm like, man, I don't know. I don't know. But then it was like, boom, here we go. The next morning, went and jumped right back in that same stand. And it was interesting because this deer, so I was going in the gate on the south side, and it's a hike to get into the middle. I'm going in the gate, and I just pull up my reveal app quick, and I look, and there's sticker 10 on the far east side of the property, like way far east side. Like, well, I'm not going to go and chase a picture. Like, I know where he's been, where he wants to be. I'm still going with my plan. It wasn't an hour, half hour after daylight. That deer got all the way around me. And I'm talking, this is probably 1,700 yards ish. That deer got all the way around me and ended up coming out to my west. So on the complete other side, comes out in the cornfield. And here he came. I mean, he just came across that cornfield. He was cruising. He checked some does on the way and ended up shooting him at like, I think he was like 39 yards out in that standing cut cornfield. And that was it. Just fortunate. A lot of intel, a lot of history played into that. Going with the gut, I think waiting for the right time to hunt him was kind of crucial. Like I didn't need to go in there and burn days just to burn days. Like I wanted to wait and let him do what he was going to do and become killable before you go in and try to kill him. And then there's obviously a lot of luck involved there, me being the one that was there and the deer showing up when I was there. So
did that deer teach you anything after hunting him so hard this year and watching him the year previous and all that history? Is there anything you can take away from this?
Yeah, I think, one of the main things is big deer. And I've noticed this with several other big deer, and not just ones I've shot, but ones I've filmed. Big deer like that have a core area that you can hold. They're habitual. So they will do the same things over and over again. Like I look at a lot of yearly historical data. I pay a lot of attention to intel, what my cameras are telling me, but like from 4 to 5 years old, that deer did a lot of the same things. I killed another big deer a few years back, like to the T, it was like when the rut hit, he was in this same spot for 5 days. Like I think those bigger, older deer figure out what's safe, right? And they just learn that after doing it year after year, and they'll continue to do those, same things. So I think, looking at that historical data, if you can, I think is really, really crucial. And then, not over pressuring your deer before you go in and he becomes killable. Some deer become killable the first week of the season, right? You get them on a pattern, whatever. I thought this deer potentially would be killable maybe the first week. But he just wasn't. He was nocturnal. He was coming to food, but just at night. So it was like, okay, wait till the time is right and then go in there and kill him.
How do you keep track of that historical data? That's something that I personally geek out about a lot, and my buddies give me a hard time about the spreadsheets I make, trying to keep track of all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. But I've always thought, like, how do people keep this all in their head? Are you one of those guys that can just store it up there, or do you have to write it down or put it somewhere?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. Like I learned from Tom Inderbo over there, who's got 13 million yellow notepads with notes of what this doe did back in 1972, with the wind direction and all that stuff. So yeah, I do that. I'm a big one of keeping, like, I make sure, even though I'm running cell cameras, like, to go get those cards after the season or whenever I can, log all that data, try to organize it the best that I can right at the moment.
Yeah.
So when I go back, I can say, okay, look, here's kind of what that deer did, and make notes. Fortunate for what I do, like, we film a lot of our stuff. So, like, I can always go back and look at footage too. And, that stuff's all really organized in big server system here. So, it's easier for me to go back and kind of compare footage to trail camera and that kind of thing too. But I don't have a long list of stuff. It's, I guess a lot of it's up here, and just, I guess I'm always thinking about it. So,
yeah, man, speaking of the, storing all of your trail camera pictures and logging all those, I've had, I don't know what you'd call it, just a folder system of all of my bucks, like older than 2. I usually save every buck that's like 2 or older. Since 2009, I think I've had them all on my computer, organized by property, by year. And I've kept that going. So all 14 years or whatever it is. And last week I ran out of space on my computer. And so I was clearing out some old podcast files and different things like that. And so I wiped a whole bunch of stuff like that, stuff that I didn't need anymore. So I'd have some, space on the computer. And then the other night I was looking for a camera picture, looking for some picture that I wanted to reference back to. I'm like, why is my trail camera folder not coming up? Where's my trail camera folder? And I somehow deleted my entire trail camera archive. It's gone.
That is brutal.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
That's devastating.
That's soul crushing.
I'm glad, like, the only silver lining is that the last 2 years, all of my I've used only cell cameras the last 2 years, and then used them partially for the last, like, probably 3 or 4. So I have a lot of that stuff still in the cloud. So at least, like, the recent data, like deer I'm still hunting now, I'll be able to look back on and get that stuff. But still, like, all the pictures I have of all these bucks over the years that sometimes go back there and look, or I need a picture of this deer or that deer, like, it's gone.
Yep. Man, that's brutal.
Yeah.
That's a good lesson. Back it up.
Yeah.
I mean, that.
So yeah, I do know it. I just didn't follow the advice I would have given. So,
man, bummer.
Anyways,
start a new catalog.
Yeah. So you killed sticker 10, your first booner, and you're flying high, and then you go to Iowa. How did this buck in Iowa come to be? It looks like, am I right that buck's even bigger?
Yeah, it is. And they're
maybe substantially bigger.
They're actually pretty close, to be honest with you. Score wise, the buck in Iowa is kind of that next level up, kind of what we talked about. I mean, you hold sticker 10 and he is just big. He's big framed. He's just that beautiful stacked tine. He's got it all. And then you hold this Iowa deer and he's just heavy, gnarly, like probably, I don't know exactly how old this deer was. For sure 5, could be 6, easily 7, like in that upper age structure, but super massive, heavy. The only thing that I think, the reason that they score real similar, that deer in Iowa actually had pretty short beams. So like, he, on the one side, his one beam, his right beam was only 18.5 inches. And I think this other one was 21. But again, he had it all. He had a big inline tine. And that deer, it's interesting, kind of a different story. I don't have a lot of history. I didn't put in a ton of time with that deer outside of killing him. So I was hunting with some friends of mine down at Big Buck Down Outfitters in Iowa. And I've known those guys for quite a few years. And one of the shows that we produce, Love the Grind, those guys hunt down there quite a bit and hunted down there this archery season. And they were going back down there. Trey's wife, Kira, was going to be hunting. And I had the opportunity to go down there during the first shotgun season and hunt with all those guys. So, I was pretty excited still, like you said, flying high from this other Minnesota buck. I mean, my season was made already. And there was a deer that Jeff from Love the Grind actually had 2 encounters with during the bow season. And talking to Corbin, some buddies down there, they're like, man, this deer is still there. And like, he's there. And I think we got a good chance at him. So, the week before the season, sending me lots of trail camera photos. And this deer is like, he's all over the place. He's, here midday, he's 3 times a day in the daylight, he's there. And he's going to this big food source, a big standing bean field. And I think, there were probably still tail end of the rut there. That's why he was moving during the day a lot. So I was like, man, I was getting excited, and probably 4 days before I got down there, deer quit doing it. Like, he absolutely changed his pattern. Wasn't showing up on the north side of the farm anymore. And they're like, man, what happened? Where'd he go? And I think it was just, he was at that point where, temperatures were mild, didn't need to drive him to food. He wasn't, really focused on does anymore. Well, the south side of the farm is big CRP, tall grass, just some little creek bottoms. And they said, maybe we need to shift our focus down there. Well, set up some cameras, boom, there he was. And he had shifted from the north side of the farm down to the south side of the farm.
How far of a distance is that?
Oh, probably, not super far. If you look at a section, north side, south side. But I bet probably from where he shifted his core area was 1,500 yards. Okay. So not a super long ways, but like from him religiously doing what he was doing to now not doing it at all anymore. Yeah. And just in those few days, and they said, okay, well, here's where we got to change. They went in there, put a blind on that CRP. It's kind of backwards. So like you're switching, you're in those December months and you're thinking, okay, got to start focusing on food. Yeah. Well, now we're shifting away from the food. And it was one of those deals like, man, we got to kill this deer in where he's feeling comfortable. He's living in this CRP. Nobody's bothering him. And we got down there and I remember climbing into the blind and it getting light. And it was like, there wasn't a lot of timber around at all. There was some across the road, but it was just like these little tiny creek drainages. And man, we saw a pile of deer the first day. I mean, a pile. Didn't see him. Saw some bucks, a lot of does just working through the CRP. You could tell they just felt comfortable there. Second day, we went in there. We were hunting in the morning and the evening. And it was the second evening. We were actually watching some deer out the right side of our blind. And so I'm spun all the way around. Connor, who's filming me, he looks down to the left and he's like, hey, there's a buck coming down the creek. And this is probably an hour before dark. And he's like, it's him. And sure enough, I turned around and I'm like, I don't see him. Where is he? He's like, he's right there. He's right there, right in front of us. And I'm like, Connor, I don't see him. Where is he?
That's always helpful. Right there.
Right. We're running some secondary angles in there and it's cool. Like that's kind of the coolest part for me is just to watch this interaction back and forth. And finally he was just in one section where the blind, the corner of the blind was there. And I peeked out to the left and there he was, and he was coming and kind of had to wait for him to get clear because he was behind some CRP and then it'd be open and whatever else. And, made a shot. I was shooting a custom muzzleloader from Elevated Arms. That was a sweet gun. And shot him at 187 yards, I think. And that was kind of end of that deal. It was interesting because I had seen a lot of trail camera photos and videos of that deer. And, some he looks like he's, a 160. Other ones he turns, he looks like he could be 200. So there was a lot of, and when I saw him, it was like, I looked at one side and that was it. Didn't look at him again. Everybody's like, how do you look? How do you look? I'm like, couldn't tell you. I just know it's him.
Big.
and I remember walking up and there was a group of us that walked up there and it was like, man, that hit me like a freight train when I walked up there and picked him up. It was just like, I was so appreciative of the season I already had. And then to have this deer now, holding this deer, it was like, am I dreaming somebody pinched me? Because it was like, this deer is a whole different, even caliber than that one. And, then it was like, oh my God, this dream season, and everybody's telling me, and I'm like, look, everybody just calm down. I want to appreciate this one for what it is.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to take away from that one or take away from this one. It was just, man, it's still kind of surreal. It didn't really sink in until I got back here and started getting back in the swing of things. And it's like, man, it's been an incredible year for sure.
So when you look back on this whole season, and you kind of talked like you've had this progression since you moved out to Wisconsin and started taking it more serious. Now over the years, you've gotten deeper and deeper and deeper, and you've killed a lot of good deer, but you still hadn't crossed that, that pinnacle mark that so many of us kind of obsess over. And then you did twice. When you look back on this year, is there anything, can you attribute this success you had this year to anything different that you did? Is there any step that you've taken that you think was like that thing that got you over the hump, or was this really just, hey, this was your year and you've been doing the right things all these years and this just happened to be the year that it all lined up just perfect?
That's a good question. I think it's a combination of both. I think it's one, I think I obsessed this year even more, and I've done this for years, but like obsessed over, the strategy and looking at Onyx, daily, and pictures, and like just trying to build these strategies and take, eliminate as many variables as I can and take it to the next level. I won't say that I did anything more crazy than that. I think I had the opportunity at two deer that were of that caliber. Not saying that I've never chased a deer that big, but not one that sticks out that's like, man, I had an opportunity to chase that deer. So I think the deer were there. It's the old adage, you can't shoot a booner or a 200-inch deer if you don't have one. So I think that all lined up this year. And I do think the other thing too is, and this is even outside of hunting, kind of an off one, is just building relationships. Like, building relationships with not only people that you have opportunities through. So like, building those friendships in Iowa and with Love the Grind, having that opportunity to go down there and hunt, building the relationships with the people on my lease, having the Deer Society guys over here, JJ and Brian and Chris, like, man, sitting down and looking and going through these strategies almost daily. And what did the deer do last night? And, getting those different opinions. So like, as much as I was the one that shot these deer, there's so much more behind the scenes that I look when I look at the rack sitting there. Like, those are the relationships and those strategies between people that I think was a big standout for me this year.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And so I have a hard time convincing my wife of this, but I'm trying to like explain to her the value of my mounts or keeping the Euros and all that kind of stuff. She's like, I just don't get why you need these all over the place. And it goes back to what you said. Like, when I see that animal again, it brings back not just the hunt, but it brings back everything that was going on. It brings back the relationships and the friendships and the ups and the downs and all that stuff just comes flooding back to you every time you stop and look at it. And you stop and look at them so often. And it's pretty special how, something like an animal can encapsulate so many other things too.
Yeah, no doubt. And then, it's, again, talk about cliche things, but like, talk about in anything in life, enjoying the chase and enjoying the process.
Yeah.
Like when I look at the deer that are on my wall, I hardly ever say that deer scores 150,
right,
or that deer. It's like, man, remember that hunt, remember that, everything that went into that. And that's why, it's hard. I guess it's easy for somebody that's tagged out to say to somebody else, like, enjoy the process, who still has a tag in their pocket or is having a tough season or whatever. But like, man, that's what it's about. Like, you got to love for lack of better terms, love the grind, love the strategy involved in it. I can tell you, like, when I shot sticker 10, like, it was a bittersweet moment.
Yeah.
Like, it was one of those things like, man, I don't get to wake up in the morning and try to figure out where he is. Or like, it was like, it's almost like this connection or this intimate relationship that you have. And it's like, you kill him and that's the goal. Right. But then it's like, man, you almost miss that. Like, I miss the chase. Like, right now I'm tagged out in Minnesota. I wake up and I'm like, I might look at my cameras. I might not, but I love that,
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. It's a weird thing when you realize, like, oh, I didn't obsessively check my cameras already. When that deer's gone, it is a little different. So
No
let's
doubt.
let's imagine a different scenario though. Let's imagine you didn't kill the sticker 10. Let's imagine he was still out there right now, and you still had, a few weeks this season. What would you be doing at this time of year to try to kill a deer like that? What's your late season approach that you'd be leaning on now?
Yeah. So, it's interesting because this year, like right now in Minnesota, it's mild. We have no snow, mild temperatures. Um, Typically, late season, like I'm going to focus 100% on food for the most part. Now, that food, a lot of times for us, is standing corn, standing soybeans. Standing soybeans can be absolutely lethal this time of year, and can be one of my favorite times to hunt if I still have a tag, just because those deer, they get back on their patterns. They're going from bedding to food. So, what I would be doing is finding where the food is, and really hunting evenings, waiting for those deer to come to me. Now, I think talk about food, it's easy to say, well, standing beans, standing corn. Right now, I don't think it's cold enough where we have the temperatures here that are driving deer in the daylight to standing corn or beans. I think when you talk about food, there's a lot that's overlooked. Like, I think woody browse, deer feeding in the woods right now is a huge thing. Like if you have any kind of down treetops or hinge cutting or anything like that, there's a lot of deer utilizing that right now. I shot a deer in Buffalo County. Shoot, this is probably 2010, over at Tom's, and it was January 2nd. I'll never forget it. And it was a big 8-pointer. I shot him in the woods. Now he was going to a food source, but wasn't getting there till night. Got in the woods, and that deer was feeding on woody browse. It was negative 18 degrees. We had snow. But it was a matter of getting in there and understanding where that deer was feeding in the daylight. So I think that's really the key to any late season hunting right now, understanding that these deer aren't doing a whole lot. Like they're resting, they're recovering from the rut. They're going from bedding to food, whatever that food source is. So if you can try to understand that and then get in a position where, they might move in the daylight, I think that's your best option. It can be hard. I think, like last year, I want to go back to that encounter with sticker 10. So we had snow last year. It was cold. And this was the last days of December. And our season goes out December 31st here in Minnesota. We had the farmer leave an acre and a half of standing beans. And all he did, though, he didn't give us the option of where we were leaving it. Like he was going to leave one hedgerow and that was going to be it. And he left it right along the wood edge. So it was going to be hard to hunt with a bow. Like you could try to get in the middle of it and put a tree stand in the middle, but like south wind, you're blowing into the woods, into the bedding, north wind, you're blowing out into the beans. Yeah. And it was like, what do you do? So Adam had a tag and I'm like, man, I know there were deer coming there. What do? We had like 5 days left of the season. And I said, the only option is, I don't like this option, but the only option is to go and put a ground blind right in the middle of the field. There was nothing else there. Put a ground blind right in the middle of the field so we can hunt it with a north wind, stay, south of the beans, be able to shoot it right in the middle and hope the deer put up with it. I'll never forget, I had my doubts. I'm like, I'm all for hunting in blinds and things like that, but like putting a ground blind out in the middle of nothing, snow, and going and hunting it. I set it one afternoon. We went and climbed in it the next day. And man, that was the day that we saw sticker 10 and he came out and fed it 50 yards. And it was like, man, it worked and it didn't bother him. Now I'm not saying that'll work every time. And I think there's something to when you set a blind like that. I think they honestly feel more comfortable if you put it right out in the middle of nothing and you're like, or you try to half-ass brush it into the wood line. Yeah. Like they feel like almost like you're hiding from them, or like, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's funny you bring that up. I had the exact same scenario that time I went and hunted with Tom, and there was a little food plot he had, but there was not a blind on it to hunt with a specific wind. So I was like, hey, I think I'm going to go in there and put a pop-up up. And so I was kind of describing to him, like, or asking him, like, hey, is there a fence along there where I'd be able to, kind of brush myself in? And he's like, oh, no, don't brush yourself in. Put it right out in the open. I'm I'm like, that doesn't sound like a good idea. Tom was like, no, trust me. They're going to be more weirded out by you kind of brushing it in than if you just stick it right out in the middle. And
Yeah.
they'll just assume it's kind of, farmer stuff. And so that's what we did.
Yeah.
And they, all sorts of deer came out and weren't bothered by it at all. So that was a very interesting, like you said, I'm not sure that would work every time, but
Right.
there certainly seems like there's something to it.
Yeah. I think, as we get to the end of the season here, like if you have a tactic that you think you should try, man, you might as well try it because you're going to run out of time. But I think the big thing is thinking outside the box when you think of what the food source is. Don't always necessarily focus on corn and beans. Obviously, that they're the big ones, or brassicas or food plots, whatever. But if your deer aren't coming to there, try to figure out what they're doing. I mean, you're in your last ditch effort, so focus on that. We do have a little flurry of a second rut that comes in. If you see any of that on your cameras, definitely get out there. But that it can be really hard late season. Like if you don't have a buck that you think you can go after, it's like you almost give up. And what I've done a lot of times, like there was a streak a few years ago where I think it was like 5 years in a row I didn't shoot a buck. Not that I didn't have opportunities, it was just like not the right one or something happened. And it can get hard towards the end of the year and you're going to need another tag. I think late season is also a good time if you don't have a buck to go after, a buck to shoot. Like get excited about something, go shoot some does or something like that. Like you'd be amazed. Like I still get excited going to shoot does, if I don't have a buck to shoot, like, man, go out and get excited about, finding what the does are doing and go shoot one and enjoy that with, people you hunt with or just for yourself. So, I think that's a lot of mindset, towards the end of the year can get grueling, can be one of the best times I think to get out there and hunt. If you have good weather, if you have a food source that deer are going to, can be one of the best times. But it all just depends.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on the doe thing. Like it seems like even if I do have a buck tag in my pocket, if it gets to the last like week or two of the season and there's not like an incredible reason to really, really, really focus on that buck, I'll usually just shift to doe season. Like, hey, it's time to just do some management and relax a little bit and have fun with it. Like go into it with a target rich environment. All of a sudden it totally changes the way you feel when you go on that hunt, when like, man, there's a really good chance I'm going to shoot a doe tonight, probably. Yep. Invite the buddies out or take my sons out. Like that is so much fun. I took my son out last night and I've got a couple friends coming up tonight to do the same thing. Going to mentor a new hunter tomorrow. Like, and that's all so much easier when you're shifting to those does and can just enjoy that. So it's a very good idea.
Yeah, there's a lot of excitement that occurs around that, like even, for guys that's their thing, shoot big bucks. It's like when you go out and like I'm gonna shoot a doe, like you can't help but not get excited about that.
I still get fired up. Yeah. Something I'm curious about, back to kind of tactics when you're after, and I guess this could be a buck or a doe. But I've heard you and Mike and JJ and those guys talk a lot about water throughout the year. Is that something that ever you think about in the late season? I mean, that's not something I typically would think, but I'm curious if that does fall within your guys' set of tools.
100%. I think water all year round is super crucial. I have seen over the years so much success over little water holes. And I think, it's easy to understand why water works early season when it's hot and that kind of thing. Throughout the whole entire season, I think they just get better. Like during the rut, water holes can be killer. Even now, like deer still need to get water, right? And it becomes tougher for them. So if you think about it, like right now out there, it's as much as it's mild, like a lot of the water is frozen. So like if you have, brassicas or some of those plots some of those plants hold some water, you'll find more deer on there. Yep. Water can be killer late season if you can find an open water source. That's the hard thing though, is most of the water sources are frozen. I do know some guys that'll go in. It's almost like they're duck hunting. Guys go in and they'll break ice and little pockets and maybe ducks come in and land. But I know guys that'll go out and try to break some ice. Now that's hard because a lot of it freezes back overnight. But if you can find an open water source late season this time of year, man, I think again it's understanding what the deer need. Like they need water. So if you can find an open water source late season, heck yeah, hunt it.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Are there any other off the wall late season things you're trying or would try, or any other thing we haven't covered that's like, hey, one more thing to have in your back pocket?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess one of the things that you could try, and I am like, if you talk about calling, I guess, I am not a guy who does a lot of calling. I will call very minimally when I have to, but I don't do a lot of calling. I think there's a certain window like pre-rut where it can be game changing.
Yeah.
But I am a guy that will do a little calling early season and even late season. Now you have to be careful when you're calling like that late season, because it's not like I'm going to go and bang horns together. But I do think, say you're hunting a food source that's close to bedding, right? And you know there's a buck in there potentially because they're not going very far, but he's not moving until just after dark.
Yeah.
I would not be afraid to go in there and as it's getting close to maybe like that last half hour, last 15 minutes, take the black record, take any kind of call, like rattling horns, and just tickle them together.
Yeah.
Because what you're doing is you're not challenging him. Well, all you want to do is convince that deer that, hey, there is other deer out there in the food plot. He's laying there like he's going to get up. He's probably hungry. It's just when.
Yeah.
If you can convince him for even a second to get up 2 minutes earlier and think, hey, there's deer out there. It's creating this illusion that, hey, maybe it's even convincing him a few minutes earlier. Now be careful. It's just think about what you're seeing. That's when people ask me, how do you call? It's like, well, I call based on what I'm seeing out there. What are the deer doing? And that's how I do it that time of year. But like you'll see little bucks out there just kind of tickling around, messing around. Try it. At that point, if you can do anything to get that deer up 2, 3, 1 minute earlier before, shooting light ends,
That helps.
Might help.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. And I do think sometimes we discount how important just that little bit of social confirmation matters to a buck. Just enough to know, like, hey, there's other deer out here. They're feeling safe. The coast is clear. Yep. If you're hearing some bucks sparring, that means the coast is clear. If you hear a little contact grunt, okay, hey, it's safe enough. There's a couple other deer out there. Maybe I'm going to start edging my way. I mean, that is important stuff.
Yeah, no doubt.
So Bryan, if my 5-year-old son, who is nuts about deer hunting, wanted to go on YouTube tonight and watch one of your guys' YouTube videos there that you've produced for Deer Society, or really, I know you work on a whole bunch of things.
Yeah.
Where would you send us if you were going to send us to one video that you've worked on or that you are in that you think my 5-year-old will get a kick out of? Give me one recommendation on that, and then give me the rest of the resume of things we can be looking for, ways we can connect with you and your work.
Yeah. That's a really great question. There's one that pops out, but I don't know if it would resonate yet with your 5-year-old. It would resonate with you. There's a film we did a few years back. And it was called Love Dad, and it's on Deer Society YouTube channel. And it was a film based on the premise of me going on my first mule deer hunt. And it was in Alberta. But it wasn't about me shooting this deer. It was a letter to my son. So that's how the film progresses. So, it opens up with, me writing this letter, and it says, to my son Barrett. And at the time he was just born. That was the year he was born. And it walks through this process of the hunt, but what hunting has taught me and how it's molded me as a person. And like the lessons I've learned and failures and all of these different things. I'm pretty passionate about that one just because I think it's well produced.
Yeah,
but
that's awesome.
It's really from the heart, and it meant a lot to me. Now my son's 5 and took him turkey hunting for the first year this year. And, I look at him when I was writing that letter, he's just a little baby, and now he's 5 years old, and teaching him those traditions. So I think that's a pretty special one. So you could try to have him watch that one. It's pretty cool. There's a good message there. And,
awesome.
And, I think maybe you'd enjoy watching it with them. So, That'd be the one that I would
All
recommend.
right, that's the one. So then plug everything else. Where can we see the other videos? Where can we get the podcast? Anything else you want folks to know about?
Yeah, so a lot of our content, some of the film content stuff you'll find on the Deer Society YouTube channel. A ton of stuff out there. Really great hunts in there too. Lots of different stuff. Some engaging off the wall stuff. So entertaining stuff there. Also host the Deer Society podcast. That's obviously up there on the Deer Society YouTube channel as well. And then as far as other almond eye stuff, we produce Love the Grind TV, which is on the Sportsman's channel. Do the post-production for Beyond the Hunt with Rick and Julie, and then do a lot of other films and things across the board, working with just different brands and people within the hunting industry, as well as outside of it. So kind of more of that stuff is all over the place. You can check out Almond Eye Productions on Instagram and Facebook. We try to do a good job at keeping up with that. Don't always do the best. Kind of get lost on focusing on our clients there, but definitely going to get better at that. But yeah, so Almond Eye Productions and stuff kind of all over.
Awesome. Well, hey, you're doing good work, man. I'm enjoying it. I appreciate the effort and hard work you guys put into it, and I'm glad that you had a heck of a season. Congratulations.
Well, I appreciate it very much. Again, I appreciate the invite to be on here. Big fan. You guys do a great job. You do a great job, and really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. All right, and that's a wrap. Thank you all for listening. Thanks for being here. I say it every week, but I really do mean it. I appreciate you being a part of this community. It's been the privilege of my life to get to hear from you, to share these stories, to learn alongside of you on this journey. It's been, 15 plus years now for me, and 10-ish years on the podcast, and it's been a wild ride. So here's to another great year coming up. Hope you all have a wonderful Christmas, happy holidays, have fun with your friends and family, get out there. I hope you get a chance to fill another tag or two before the end of the year. And until then, stay wired to hunt.